Hi, and welcome to a special edition of my Floss 2 channel. I'm Jean Farish, and I am so glad that you're here with me. Today, we're going to start a stitch-along project that you are more than welcome to jump in at any time and get and be a part of all this. Whether you're stitching alone or with a group, if you want to join our Facebook page, which is one of the group Facebook pages, that's JFN SAL, which stands for Jean Farish Needleworks Stitch Along. And whether you buy the chart from my Etsy store or from your favorite local needlework store, if you have it in your stash, or if you have bought a new copy, any and all are welcome to join us in this little project. So I want to start with something that no designer likes to do, and that's talk about errors in a chart. So if you downloaded or bought the copy that looks like this, there are a couple of mistakes. Frankly, the sort of things where if you stitched it and you were not aware of it, you probably would not notice. But I do feel a responsibility to point them out to you. So that's what I'm going to do right off the bat. So let's take a look. Now, again, I'm just talking about the version that looks like this. As far as I know, the one that I replaced it with in my Etsy store is all fine. It is the sort of thing where every designer knows that nobody ever produces a perfect chart. We do our best, but sometimes it's human error. So one thing I noticed when I was doing this is that one of the dark lines is missing right along here. So and I have no explanation for that. I've never noticed that on any of my charts. So whether it was a software glitch or whatever, it is the sort of thing that I should have noticed it, and I didn't. So I apologize for that. Then the first thing I noticed was in the grass that the house sits on, this symbol right here should be the half symbol, as well as the 2 right here. So that's 3 little stitch errors right there. And then what I noticed was that on this motif, that the leaf is slightly higher than it should be. So it should be, again, same symbol, and should be here. Okay, and then the corresponding flower on the opposite side, which is this is page 3. And if you go to page 5, that leaf is entirely missing. So it should be right here. And I think that's it. Oh, actually, there is one more. And finally, this heart right here, the outline around it, which is symbol S on this version, which is color, well, it's listed as, I think, medium beige, should actually be light olive. And again, it's the sort of thing where if you stitched it the other way around, I really don't think that you would notice it. Since I was going in there and fixing these other things, I just went on and did it. And as I said in the email that I sent the people that I knew had bought this copy, I sent them not an email, but a message through their Etsy purchase, alerting them that I had found these mistakes and corrected them. And as I explained to them, the software I used in that version is like 3 versions ago from the ones that I'm using now. And so I didn't have it on my laptop anymore. So that meant recharting the whole thing, which, I didn't mind doing because, again, I think that's my responsibility as a designer. When I find a mistake, to just fix them, to own up to it and say, hey, this is a better chart now. So and also the other thing I realized is that on the personalization page, I gave you a complete alphabet, but neglected to give you numbers. And so the new version also has that. And finally, feedback that I've gotten from people who love to stitch from PDF files because they upload them to their tablet or whatever. I added a feature, and that is a single page chart, a single page within the file that has the whole chart on it. So those of you who like to download it, you don't have it in pieces like those of us who are still working from paper versions. So anyway, okay, so that's all of that. Okay, so this is where I expected to begin, and that is to tell you the things that you need to know to get started on your project. So the first important thing is that this is a design that can be worked on Aida as well as linen. And by the way, when I say Aida, I realize a lot of people pronounce it Ada, and we're talking about the same fabric, even though we're saying it, pronouncing it differently. I learned to say it that way from listening to the people from this Weigert company that I was first familiar with as a designer way back, like I say, in the early 80s. So I don't know what the right pronunciation is. As long as we know that we're talking about the same fabric, we're good. So this design, because it's all cross stitch, there's not even any back stitch in this design. You can easily stitch this on Aida. So that also means that you can stitch it on any even weave, like Jobelin, Monaco, Lugana, as well as linen. Now, my instructions in this set of videos will all be done on linen, and it will all be done stitching on what we call over 2, which is to say that we're stitching 2 linen threads wide and 2 linen threads high as one square on the chart. So let me throw an image up here on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. When you're stitching on Aida, 1 square on the chart is equal to 1 square on the Aida. When you're stitching on linen and stitching over 2, 1 square on the chart is equal to the intersections of 2 linen threads crossing 2 linen threads. I have become so accustomed to stitching on linen that frankly I don't even think I have any Aida here in my workshop or studio, whatever you want to call this space. And again, I am not disparaging stitching on Aida at all. Those of you who love stitching on it, that's all there is to it. There's no factor of good or bad or whatever. It is. That is what you like to stitch with, and that's fine. It's like saying you like Italian food, or you like French food, or you like whatever type of cuisine, and that's a personal preference. As we're going along, if you find that what I'm showing you introduces you to the possibility of stitching on even weaves or linens, then that's good too. This is not, I don't want you to see this as any kind of a progress report. It's not like if you stitch on Aida, here you are, and if you stitch on linen, you know, you're here. That is not the case at all. For this project, as I say, either one of them are good. I do have to say that by stitching only on Aida, you are somewhat limiting yourself to some of the stitching projects that just won't work on Aida. So that's all I'm going to say about it. Okay, so I hope we're good. So the first thing I want to talk about is possible colors and counts of linen to work with, and also the color range we're talking about works with Aida as well, because wow, there are certainly so many more choices of Aida colors than there ever were when I was first started designing. Um, so some of what I'm going to say about color applies to both types of fabric. I decided that I was going to stitch on a color called Mariner's Map. Mariner's Map is a very pale, what I call toasty color. It's not, um, it's just a very, very calm neutral. And you know what I see on my camera and what I see on my laptop monitor and what you see at home, colors are not always going to be accurate. So do keep that in mind as we're talking about this. So in that previous shot, I was showing you a really wide range of colors, and now I'm narrowing it down to just a half a dozen or so. Here are three different colors that would all be classified as white. This one is called Cobweb Lace. It's a very, very bright, true white. And then in the middle is definitely a sweeter color with a sweet name of Coconut Macaroon. And then this last one is called Custard Cream. So all of these would be considered in the category of white or off-white, cream, etc. So they're all excellent choices. In my stash, I found one sample of a gray called London Mist, although I have a feeling this one may have been discontinued. But again, there are other pale grays that are also good. So that's a good choice. And then in the kind of darker tones, so this is the Mariner's Map. And this one is a Zweigert fabric called Antique Ivory. And then finally I have Pecan Shortbread. So again, any of these would be excellent choices for this project. Picking out your fabric color is often completely entwined with the count that you're stitching with, since not all colors are available in all counts of fabric. For this project, and because I am focusing on the beginner to intermediate stitcher, I am suggesting that you stitch on anything from a 25 to a 32 count fabric, and we're going to be stitching over 2. That's not to say that you can't stitch this over 1 or that you can't stitch it on a finer linen. You can, but my instruction is going to be focused in stitching over 2, and again directed at the stitchers that may need a little bit of extra guidance. When we're stitching over 2 on even weave or any kind of a linen, then we have to look at 2 different terms. There is thread count, which is the number of linen threads per inch woven into the fabric, and there's stitches per inch. So once we decide we're going to be stitching over 2, a 30 count linen becomes 15 stitches to the inch. A 28 count linen becomes 14 stitches to the inch. A 25 count even weave becomes 12.5 stitches per inch. So both of these numbers are important to us. Now, I know that there are fabric calculators out there, and I would love to trust that the technology and the programming is so perfect that there are no glitches and no problems with them. That said, figuring out your fabric, figuring out how large to count, I can't talk today. Figuring out how large to cut your fabric is not difficult to learn. So I'm going to take the time right now to teach you how to figure out how much fabric you need for this project. And keep in mind that this can apply to lots of other projects as well. Using a fabric calculator as a backup or to check your work or to get like a second opinion, I think is fine. But I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't learn how to do it yourself. So let's take a look at the steps. I want to say that the first step in this process is actually checking the stitch count of the fabric that you have chosen. Now, this is a sample of Mariner's map that I have on hand. And I have stitched a row of over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2. And I stitched it approximately 2 inches in length because I think that you get a more accurate computation by doing a little bit longer stretch. If I only did this for an inch, I may not pick up a slight difference. So let's look and see how many threads per inch we actually have on this. Now, this is labeled as a 30 count linen. Since I'm stitching over 2, I will end up with 15 stitches per inch. So let's look and see if that's what I actually have. So since each one of these is over 2, under 2, I'm counting that as a stitch, this is a stitch, etc. So let's count in twos. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. I'm getting 31, almost 32 in 2 inches. I'm not pointing this out to fault the manufacturer in the slightest, but I want to tell you this is not an uncommon thing. So if in doubt, check the count before you do anything else. So now I've determined that this is actually closer to 32 threads per inch than 30 threads per inch. Now I can still use the 30 count, 15 stitches per inch safely, because since it's closer to 32 threads per inch, my design is going to be slightly smaller. This step is important in case the computation goes the other way. If you're thinking it's going to be 15 stitches to the inch and it ends up being 14 stitches to the inch, if you're doing a little tiny ornament, it's not going to make a big impact. But if you're doing a large piece and it's off by 1 stitch per inch, it can cause you to not have enough fabric. So this is a reason why this is an important step, and one that's really rests on the shoulder of the stitcher, in my opinion. So, okay. So how do we do the math? I made a couple of chalkboard sort of images here, which I want to show you so that you have an idea of how to do this. And you're going to see it's really, really easy. You can use your phone. It's got a calculator on it. So we're going to use this particular chart as the example. And again, this can all be applied to any chart. So on this one, your stitches per inch, and I actually give 2 different ones here because you can stitch this with the date, and I have that charted for you on page 2. In which case the whole design is going to be 113 across and 113 down. If you don't do the date and instead you do the border all the way around, like the sample that's on the cover, then it's still going to be 113 across and it's going to be 115 down. Now, in my opinion, those 2 stitches are not going to have a great impact on whether or not your fabric is going to be the right size. So we're going to use the 113 throughout this process. So if you're working on fabric that's 14 stitches to the inch, the 113 divided by 14 comes out to 8.07. That's not even a quarter of an inch. That's not even an eighth of an inch. So I like to round up. So I'm going to round it up to 8 1/4. If you're working 15 stitches to the inch, then that same number 113 divided by 15 gives you 7.53, which is just a hair over 7.5. So what we really want to know is how much fabric we're going to need. Next, you have to decide how much extra fabric you want on the perimeter of the design. So between the design and however you're going to finish it, whether it's going to be matted or framed without a mat, or if you're going to make it into a pillow and put edging around it, like a fabric edging to make it larger. What I think quilters call satching would be what that would be like. Or if you're just going to make the pillow the actual size of the fabric. All of this has an impact on how big you cut that fabric. Now, I'm going to proceed as if we're going to frame this. But before I take those steps, let me just say something to those of you who are thinking about a pillow. If you are going to center the design and you want lots of fabric around the outside edge, then that's how much fabric you need to add, plus the seam allowance. So just keep that in mind. So sometimes, this is why it bothers me when people use the magic 3 inches, like you have to add 3 inches all the way around. That's just not true. If you are going to, again, make this into a pillow, you might need more than 3 inches all the way around. If you are planning on framing it in a way that it's very close in, you might not need 3 inches all the way around. Now, coincidentally, for me, for this design, I'm going to use the 3-inch number. Let me show you something about this piece and the way it's framed, which I apply to many, many things that I do that have mats. So just bear with me for a second. My stitching that is pinned, mounted to foam core only goes to here. It doesn't come all the way to the edge of the frame on each side. I see no reason to do that, and neither does my framer. And your framer might have a different viewpoint. I consider it a waste of money for me to have a piece of fabric that's large enough that I can go all the way from frame edge to frame edge and have some to wrap around the edges to be attached. So I don't really know what they call this. I call it floating. So what there is behind this is the square of the foam core that has the piece mounted. Then there are extra pieces on the sides and top and bottom to fill in the gaps. And that's how I do all of my things that are matted. And I do that because I'm frugal. I'd rather not spend money I don't have to spend, so I have that money to spend on something else, like more cross-stitch stuff. So my final step is to figure out how large to cut my fabric. In this project, to suit my needs, I need 3 inches on all 4 sides of my fabric. So I'm going to take 3 inches plus the 8 1/4 plus 3 inches to give myself 14 1/4 inches. Now that's if you're stitching on 14 count fabric. But that's how you figure it out, whether it's for this project or any project. You take your design size, you divide the number of stitches across by the number of stitches per inch for your fabric, and that gives you the size of the stitched design. You then have to add whatever space you want around the fabric to show, say, between the design and your mat, plus a little bit of extra to go to be wrapped around the foam core. Or if you're making it into something else, you need to take the design size plus the area that you want to show, plus whatever you need to make that function. And that's how you figure out how big to cut your fabric. Now, this design is pretty much square. Well, it's a circle, but it's pretty much the same size across as it is up and down. And so if you're stitching with 14 stitches the inch, you're pretty much good to go with a 14-inch square piece of fabric. Maybe 14 and a quarter if you want a little bit of extra margin. And that's it. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to treat your fabric. And I think that this next step is fairly important for any project that you're going to be stitching over days or weeks and possibly even months. And I've had at least one project that I have worked on for years, and that is to protect the edges of your fabric. And I like 3 different methods. 2 of them involve using a sewing machine, and that would be to either zigzag or serge the edges. And the 3rd method is to use a product called Fray Check, and you basically apply it on the edges and let it dry, and then it will keep the edges from raveling. Now, I'm aware that there are a lot of people who don't do anything to their edges, and I think it is true that after a while, you know, a certain number of threads are going to unravel around the edges, and then it will probably stop unraveling. And if that's your style, I don't, you know, I don't have an objection. I think you're taking a little bit of a chance of the unraveling. The one thing I would say not to do is I am not a proponent of putting any kind of tape around the outside edges. If you are going to put tape on it, then add that 1/2 inch all the way around, which means an extra inch on the width and the length, to allow you to cut the tape off when you're finished before you do the framing. I think that it's unrealistic to think that you can take that tape off without leaving any kind of a gummy residue. So that's my take on the subject. And after you weigh the pros and cons, then whatever you decide to do is totally up to you. But I like serging or zigzagging the edges, and or using Fray Check. Those to me are the best choices. Okay, so one of the questions that comes up often is, what happens if your fabric has a crease in it? Especially if, just by the luck of the draw, the fabric that you're stitching with ends up being the one that was in the center as it came off the bolt, which means the fabric has been folded in half and wrapped around a bolt for shipping and for storage. Pretty standard for any type of fabric other than, say, decorator fabrics, which are usually flat out on a roller rather than on a bolt. So, you know, there are people who are concerned about that crease. I've never really been bothered by them. If you are, then I would spray it with a little bit of water and iron it before you start. You probably aren't going to get it out entirely, but it will flatten it out a little bit. So that's probably the last step in preparing your fabric for stitching. Well, actually, for the benefit of those who use Aida, here's a question about Aida. A lot of people find it to be very, very stiff. Part of that is the design of the fabric. I mean, it is a deliberate part of the manufacturing process. Aida is designed and manufactured for an easy way to do counted thread work. There's no other way to describe it. It is, when you look at it very, very closely, it's 4 threads woven up and down and 4 threads woven side to side that are then interwoven with each other to make that block that you define as a place to put a stitch. And it's woven in that way to help the stitcher keep their tension even. By making it tightly woven and making it stiff, the idea is it sort of like training wheels. It is going to keep the stitcher from pulling their stitches too tightly. Now, it's not going to keep you from having it too loose, which is also a tension problem. But that is the nature of Aida. If that stiffness bothers you, then pre-wash it by hand. I'm not recommending that you put it in the washing machine. I don't really see any need for it. But you can get some of that sizing out of the fabric and soften it up a little bit by pre-washing it. So that's one little tip that might help you. I do have one footnote to add to what I said about if you end up with that serious crease down the middle of your fabric, what to do. And I said that if you spray it with water and iron it, you'll get most of it out, but not all of it. What I meant was temporarily so that you can actually start stitching. If you're not planning on washing and ironing your project when you are finished, then it is important to go ahead and get that crease completely out. Now, those of you who know me know I am a very strong proponent of washing and ironing every project when I am finished. I have yet to have a project I did not wash and iron in 40 plus years of doing this professionally. So I'm not the least bit intimidated by that. However, if you are using a thread that you're concerned with it bleeding or whatever, and you don't want to wash and iron your project when you're finished because of the threads that you're stitching with, then it is important to prepare your stitching fabric so that it won't need to be washed and ironed later on. And I don't know, it's hard for me to address any question relating to a project that has any feature that will keep it from being washable. So I'm trying to be open-minded about that, but I'll just fess up right now. I'm not very open-minded about it. That's, I just think you should be able to wash and iron all your needlework, your counted cross stitch. I'm not talking about gold work and shaded silk embroidery and, lots of other things. I'm talking about standard counted cross stitch. So now you know how I feel about that. Well, now that we've taken care of choosing a fabric color and type of fabric and stitch count and figured out how big to cut our fabric, the next thing to take a look at is how to prepare our floss. There are many different ways to store your floss, and that's basically what I want to talk about. You have to have a way of working your floss beyond just leaving it in the skein. Actually, you know what? I have to back up there. You could leave it in the skein and just pull a length out each time you needed floss to stitch with, and then just attach the excess to your skein, because after all, we are going to be using 2 strands at a time out of our 6 strands. And if you're using the loop method, which I am very much in favor of, I'm only using 1 out of the 6 strands at a time. So there's always a question of what are you doing with the other 4 or 5 strands that you're not using initially. So one option is just to pull off the length that you want, cut it, and take the 1 strand out, and then just maybe use a lark's head or something to attach it back to the skein. What I don't like about that is at some point in time, you're going to use up enough of the floss to where those little paper labels are going to get too loose and they're just going to fall off. And there's always the chance of the skein itself getting tangled. So of all the ways to prepare your floss for stitching, I find that the least desirable. Have I used it before? Yes, when I am anxious to get started and I just want to pull out that first strand and cut it and get going, then yes, I have. But it's, it's the amount of time you take in prepping your floss will pay off big time as you're going along. So what are the different ways that are the most popular right now? One is to keep each skein in a little floss bag. It can even just be a branded type Ziploc bag made for counter cross stitch, or it can just be a Ziploc bag that you would get, like the snack size that you get at the grocery store or whatever. So that's one way, bags. Another way is to use bobbins, and I don't know if it's the most popular way, but it's certainly the way that, you hear more people talking about. They talk about bobbinating their floss. It's not my favorite way, primarily because it takes a lot of time, but also because you end up with, when you take your floss off the bobbin, you end up with a zigzaggy strand. So that's two ways. Some people like to cut their floss in lengths and then braid it. And that I think I used that back when I was in high school. And again, that works until you have used so much of the floss that you don't have anything left there to braid. Sort of like your braid's gone bald. Anyway, my favorite method are thread drops, and that's what I'm going to show you now. Again, from the very beginning, I said that what I'm sharing with you is what I find to work the best, and so that's what I'm going to do. So thread drops are pretty widely available. I mean, I can't say I've seen them in every needle workshop I've ever been in, but they they're not hard to find. And some people like making their own. I'd rather spend my time stitching. And I'm a crafter. I have all kinds of punches and whatnot for card making and scrapbooking. And so there are some punches that can be used for this. And you'll every once in a while see a post from somebody who will show very proudly and justifiably so a set of thread drops that they've made on their own. So I'm going to show you the system that works for me. So this is a thread drop. They come like 30 to a package, and I think that you're going to find them retailing anywhere from maybe $7.50 to $8, somewhere in that range. And what I do, because I use many different brands of threads, is I'm going to label this Cosmo, because that's the floss that I'm using. So I know when I pick this up and I look at the number that it is Cosmo floss. Now I'll end up doing this for all 22 skeins. I'm using the 20 called for colors plus 2 of the Seasons variegated threads by Cosmo. It'll be my first time using those, so I'm really kind of excited about that. So I'm going to start with the 2 colors that I'm going to first stitch with for this project are 573 and 637. I'll do that for each one of the skeins. And then what I'm going to do is I take a pencil and I'm going to add the symbol for this project. And I do it in pencil so that the next time I need, say, 573, it might have a different symbol. The symbols are not, the symbols go with a floss color and floss number for a particular project. So this one, 573, the symbol is actually the number 7. And 637, the symbol, is actually a heart that's filled in. That's how I'm gonna label all of my thread drops. And then what I do is I'm going to take the labels off, and I'm gonna put my label with the matching thread drop so I don't get this mixed up. I'm gonna very gently start unraveling this. I'm leaving it on my hand, and then this is a cardboard jig I made that's 15 inches long, and the width doesn't really matter. And I've actually put 2 pieces of cardboard together with a small piece in between to make a groove up here at the top. And I'm just going to start up here at the top, and I'm going to start wrapping it. Now I've left it around my wrist, whoops, so it won't get tangled. And I'm just, every once in a while, I'm just undoing a length. If you've got somebody to help you that they can hold on to the skein for you while you're doing this wrapping, then that works too. And sometimes I just kind of go around like this, leave it on my wrist and just keep going around like this until the whole thing, whoops. Okay. If it starts getting tangled, don't pull tightly. You're just gonna make it worse. So just need to loosen it up, not tighten it up. And then just keep going around and around and around and around. And grab your pair of scissors. And I'm gonna cut this right in the groove, like that. Now, I dropped it, but there's an extra little piece. Oh no, there it is. There's a little piece that was didn't come out even with my 15-inch length. Now so each one of these is now 30 inches long, okay? Because the cardboard is 15 inches, and I'm going around all the way around and cutting it only at the top. Because I like to use the loop method, when I'm stitching, I'm actually stitching with a 15-inch length. And that's one of the things I will just tell you I feel very, very strongly about, especially for beginners, is do not try stitching with a really, really long piece of floss. A couple reasons for that. One is that you're more likely to get tangles and knots if you've got a really long piece. But more importantly, as you're stitching, you're pulling your thread through the linen over and over and over again. And eventually, it's not so much that you wear it out as you start losing some of the sheen. And your last stitch will not be as pretty as your first stitch. So those are the 2 main reasons I have for keeping your floss to a 15 or 16-inch length, working length. Again, if you're using a loop method, then you're going to double that, because once we fold it in half and start stitching, you're still stitching with the 15 or 16 inches. So, okay, so I kind of got off the topic of showing what I do with the thread drop. So now I have this 30-inch length, and I'm folding it in half. So I'm going to hold this so it's facing me, and I'm going to poke it through and come down like this and grab the tail and pull it through. So I've basically made a lark's head knot on my thread drop, okay? Let me show you the thing that really is, to me, the biggest benefit of using thread drops. When I am ready to stitch, I can simply take my needle and grab a single strand of floss and pull it straight out of the skein. I can then straighten this part out, and in my hand I have the single strand that I will now use to fold in half, start my loop method, and stitch. So that to me is the biggest benefit of thread drops, is the ease with which I can pull out that single strand It no longer matters that it's one of a 6-strand piece of floss. I'm just using 1 strand at a time, and I can just pull that one out. I don't have to worry about the other 5 strands that I'm not using right then. Yes, I know it's very easy just to take them and wrap them around your bobbin or put them back in your plastic bag or whatever. But to me, this is just, it is just such a, I don't know, it's just so easy to do it like this. So this is a system that I've been using now for a couple of years, and I really, really like it. So, you know, you find the system that works best for you, and then just stick with it, and you know, that's okay. This is not a matter of rules or what's right or wrong. I said from the very beginning that this whole series is going to be a matter of me sharing with you what I find works best. And if you get to pick and choose among the tips that I give you, and do what you think is best. So that way you can be happy about what you're stitching. Certainly one of our most basic tools are a pair of embroidery scissors, and I am being specific in saying embroidery scissors. There are many, many different types of scissors out there, and you need one that is created for, built for, has characteristics that work for this craft that you have chosen to be engaged in. These scissors are very small. I'm going to grab a ruler here. This pair is overall less than 4 inches, and this pair from one end to the other is just at 4.5 inches. So embroidery scissors tend to be small. You do need to make sure that they are comfortable, that when you put your fingers in the finger holes that they're comfortable. Another characteristic is that the blades are very slender, not just in the span this way, but also in terms of the thickness this way. They come to a point. They're very, very sharp, and that's what makes a good pair of embroidery scissors. I just want to, since I've got these sitting here, a shout out to the Windy City EGA that sent me this scissors and fob by way of my good friend Diane Herman. And just a nice shout out and thank you to them for that. Before we leave the subject of scissors, let's talk price range. You can get a good pair of embroidery scissors for in a range of $25 to $50. There are certainly some novelty scissors that are cheaper than that, and there are certainly some exquisite scissors that are absolutely works of art that are vastly more expensive than that. But in that $25 to $50 range, you will easily find a pair of scissors that will serve you well as any beginner, intermediate, advanced needleworker. I love talking to students who proudly show me that they are using scissors that came to them from their grandmother or great-grandmother, and that is not all that unusual. If you get a pair of good scissors and you take care of them, they will last for a long, long time. Let's talk about needles. This is a tapestry needle. I'm going to come in a little bit closer here. This is actually a size 20 needle, and I'm using it for purposes of scale. This is a size 26, which is a size that I'm going to be using. You can see the way the eye is shaped. It's a very long and narrow opening. I'm going to move the size 20 needle out of the way and replace it with a typical sewing needle meant for hand sewing. And you can see the difference in the way the eye is shaped between these two needles. Now, another tool that I recommend that you have handy is a needle threader, and I like this type. It has 2 different size hooks on it. I tend to use the smaller one. You slip the needle threader into the eye of the needle, as if you're threading it with a thread. And then you place your embroidery thread over the hook and pull it back through the eye of the needle. And you've got your needle threaded. So that's how you do that. Another tool that I strongly recommend, especially for beginners, is to get a pair of highlighters and make sure that you get the type that are clickable as opposed to the kind that have a cap that you take on and off. I've heard just too many horror stories of people who have not put the cap on tightly or not put the cap on at all, and you put the highlighter down, and of course the next thing it's going to do is come in contact with your embroidery and get highlighter ink on it. So that's just a little bit of a safety feature. One of the reasons that a lot of beginners like getting a pair of highlighters is that you can make a working copy, and if you read my copyright, you do have permission to make a working copy. And they use the yellow to highlight the area they're getting ready to stitch, and then they go back over it with the pink when they've done stitching. And then, of course, it turns orange, and that way you know what part you've stitched. So that's a wrap, I think. That kind of covers everything that you need to know about choosing your fabric and getting your supplies together and your tools together so that next week we can actually start stitching, which will be the really, really fun part. I promise you that. So between now and then, I hope that you stitch happy and stay safe.